Hey and welcome back to Fanfic Reading. Today we are reading The Warmth That Changed It All by Raalm and ToxicExotic. I hope you enjoy.
Chapter 10, Choice and Control. Weiss Schnee. Would you like me to take this to the car for you, Miss Schnee? Weiss looked at the housekeeper to see her holding a box wrapped in blue paper. Yes, please, Viola, she replied as she pulled on her jacket and looked at herself in the mirror. The white leather jacket was one of her favorites and worked very well with her pale blue t-shirt. She had also opted for a pair of slim-cut jeans and a pair of brown boots that came to a stop halfway up her shins. While she was much more of a skirt and heels girl, she quite liked the outfit as a warehouse. Weiss! The voice froze her, its unmistakable droning instantly causing her blood to turn to ice as she turned to look into the cold, apathetic eyes of her father, who was standing in her doorway. Good afternoon, Father, Weiss greeted him cautiously as she straightened her posture. Where are you going? He asked, his eyes squinting as he surveyed her outfit. Did your mother once again fail to inform you that we are entertaining guests this evening? The hint of annoyance in his voice made her skin crawl. While Weiss' relationship with her mother was strained at best, the way her father spoke of her had always aggravated her. No, Weiss lied, trying her best to keep the spite from her voice. Klein had actually been the one to tell her, but she didn't want her father to have the satisfaction of being right. Mother told me of the dinner with Mr. Scarlatina and his family. Weiss rarely lied to her father, as the man was exceedingly good at sniffing out the truth, but since she was now hiding such a large secret from him, the little white lies were something that helped return some of the warmth to her system. So again I ask, he drawled as his eyes narrowed. Where are you going? Weiss felt herself cower a little under the man's gaze. She knew that an outright lie was not something she could get away with so quickly, decided that a half-truth would have to do. A friend is having a small birthday celebration, Weiss said in an even voice, summoning as much confidence as she could muster for her next words. I gave my word that I would attend. The slight twitching of her father's mustache was a clear indicator of the anger that now broiled within him. He was now stuck between two choices: to allow her to leave and risk her returning late for dinner, or to force her to stay home and break her word to someone. Weiss was fairly confident that he would not choose the latter, as he considered a Schnee giving their word as binding as any contract. Who is this friend? His voice was tinged with disbelief. Weiss knew that he would not buy the lie so easily, and had already came up with an answer. One of the students from Shade I have been showing around, Weiss replied with a shrug. While she acted as though it wasn't a big deal, she knew it would be to her father, as he would never allow tales of a Schnee breaking their word to reach the ears of another kingdom's companies. As she looked into the man's eyes, she saw them mulling over the potential implications of each option, and knew she had one. Very well, he finally said with a sneer. You can attend this celebration, but you will be home in time for their arrival. I will not allow you to embarrass me in front of such people. The venom in the man's final word almost made Weiss wince as he turned on a heel and walked away from the room. While normally she would have taken grievance with her father's hated for the fondness, today she found herself thankful for it. Though she knew that it was selfish and unfair to be glad for her father's unjust resentment, as it distracted him enough that she could successfully lie her way into seeing Yang again, she allowed herself that one tiny win with a reminder to push her investigation of the hiring process to the top of her to-do list. The thought of Yang, however, did return a little fire to Weiss' veins, just as it had done ever since their last date. While the kiss had not been something she had expected to be so intense, she didn't regret it. She did, however, regret that she had let herself get caught up in the moment, and was worried she may have given Yang the wrong impression. Though the kiss had been incredible, and the feel of Yang's hand running down her thigh was more than enough to make her body react, she was not yet ready for things to go any further, and neither did she know when she would be. All she knew for certain was that nothing like that would be happening until they could be open about their relationship. The last thing she wanted was for Yang to feel like a dirty secret. That didn't mean she hadn't thought about it, though. She was still a teenager after all. Today was not the day for those kind of thoughts, so she shook her head clear of the encroaching images that quickly began to fill her mind and took one last look in the mirror. Satisfied with what she saw, Weiss left her room. Asterisk. The walk to Yang's house was becoming very familiar to Weiss, and so was the feeling that accompanied the sight. Never before had something as simple as a few stone slabs and some grass caused such excitement within her. However, The prospect of finally meeting Yang's sister, Ruby, caused not a small amount of nervousness to weave its way through the excitement. It wasn't that she thought she would make a bad impression on the girl. No, how to make a good impression had been drilled into her since she was a child. It was more that Yang thought the world of her little sister, so if Ruby found any reason at all to not like her, then Weiss had no idea what that would mean for the future of hers and Yang's relationship. Not wanting to dwell on those thoughts, Weiss pushed those thoughts aside and decided not to waste any more time. Ignoring the nerves that coursed through her, she reached out her hand and knocked on the door. She didn't have to wait long before the door was opened by a tall, red-headed girl with gleaming green eyes. "Hello, Weiss," Pira greeted her, a friendly smile stretching across her face as the sounds of music and laughter floated from behind her. "Good afternoon," Weiss smiled back. Since they first met a couple of weeks ago, the two of them had been in semi-regular contact. While they had never actually taken the time to meet up and hang out due to their busy schedules, they had been messaging each other occasionally, and Weiss had found that she rather enjoyed her conversations with the girl. "I can take that for you," Pira said, and indicated to the present Weiss was carrying as she moved aside to let Weiss inside. "Ruby's going to open them all later." "Thank you," Weiss said, and handed the gift to the girl. "No problem," she said, and walked around the corner into what Weiss knew was the living room. "Yang, your friend is here." Weiss did not miss the emphasis Pira put on the word friend, but she had no time to stop the girl as Yang's smiling face popped around the corner. "Hey, Weiss scream!" She grinned and walked into the hallway. Her outfit was almost the same as their first date, except her flannel shirt had been replaced with a gray, long-sleeve jacket that stopped around the bottom of her ribs. "You're just on time." "No, and of course." Weiss smiled as the girl as she walked forward and took her arm. "But I can only stay for a couple of hours. There is a business dinner I must attend at 8. "That's fine," the girl said happily. "Come on, I will introduce you to everyone." Before Weiss could even try to argue, Yang was pulling her along into the living room. "Hey guys, I got someone for you to meet," Yang said as they entered the room full of people. "This is Weiss, a friend of mine." Weiss watched as every head turned in her direction, but she only recognized a few people. Blake was sat in the corner reading a book with her head resting against Sun, and John was sat in front of the television, apparently playing a video game. She also recognized Yang's dad talking to Blake's mom, and a man who could rival her driver, Hazel, in height, that she assumed was Blake's father. The others, though, were very unfamiliar, but a girl with very orange hair was already on her feet, and walking over to them at a pace faster than Weiss could run. "Oh! My God!" The girl practically screamed less than a second later as she came to an abrupt stop in front of him. "Where did you meet a Schnee?" "Well, Weiss was about to reply when she noticed Yang give a little shake of her head, and it wasn't long before she found out why. "Never mind that. Where did you get your boots? They look so awesome." "Don't they look awesome, Ren?" The girl's rambling only stopped as the girl gasped as if she had had some sudden realization. "I should totally get some more boots. I would look super cute in them." "Ren?" Yang said in a pleading voice towards a boy with long black hair with a single pink strip in his fringe. The boy simply gave Yang a nod and made his way over to them. With a little sigh, he put his hand on Nora's shoulder. "Come on, Nora. I think Ty said something about syrup cookies." "Syrup cookies? Why am I only finding out about these now?" Before the boy could utter a single word, the girl had grabbed his arm and began to drag him towards the kitchen. "Nice to meet you, Weiss," the boy said as he was being pulled backwards. Weiss didn't know if she was imagining it, but she thought she could see a small smile on the boy's face. The next few minutes were spent greeting everyone at the party and being introduced to everyone she didn't know. Sun was someone she had encountered a couple of times in Blake's shop, but they had never actually interacted, as his attention was almost always on Blake. However, apart from him, Run, and Nora, there were only two other people that she hadn't met. One being Blake's dad, which she considered a little odd as she visited his shop quite frequently, and a young well-spoken boy named Oscar. "So where is Ruby?" Weiss asked Yang once. She had been introduced to everyone but the girl whose birthday it was. "Kitchen, I think," Yang replied and started to walk towards the kitchen as Pira, Ren, and Nora re-entered the room. "Hey, Yang," John called from in front of the television while holding up a controller. "What about our game? Oscar can finish it." The kitchen was a much less crowded than the living room, as it seemed to pretty much be only for the food, which was set out on the table buffet style. In fact, the only two people in there were Ty and Ruby, who were stood talking by the sink. As they drew closer, Ruby turned to look at them, and Weiss was able to make out much more of the girl's appearance. Yang had not been wrong. The girl before her was the spitting image of her mother in every way except height. The same black hair that just fell short of the girl's shoulders, its tips dyed a dark red. The same eyes, a shining silver that mirrored back the kitchen around her. The same pale skin that made her own look full of color. Every single thing about the girl was almost indistinguishable from the woman Weiss had seen in the picture a few weeks ago. Weiss couldn't stop the nerves that settled in her stomach and filled her full of worry, and it definitely did not help that the girl's eyes reflected her image like a mirror. In them, Weiss could see every little flaw and knew that if she could see them, Ruby definitely would. "Ruby," she heard Yang say as they came to a stop in front of the girl and her father. This is Weiss?" Knowing her nerves would do her no good, Weiss swallowed them down and summoned what courage she could to hold out her hand towards the girl. "It is nice to finally meet you, Ruby," Weiss said, trying her best to put on a convincing smile. "It's nice to meet you too," Ruby replied slowly, as she took her hand only to release it less than a second later. Weiss was a little confused. The girl before her seemed almost as nervous as her. But why? She wasn't the one on trial. She wasn't the one whose relationship rested on the approval on someone else. In fact, she was the person whose approval was required. It was only then that Weiss suddenly remembered what Yang had said about the girl having trouble around people. For some reason, knowing that Ruby was just as nervous as she was helped settle her nerves a little, so Cher put her hand into her small handbag and pulled out a small cardboard box with the word decadence stamped on the top. "Pira already took the present, but I also got you these," Weiss said as she held out the box to Ruby. "It's just some sugar cookies from a bakery downtown." The girl's eyes widened a little at the word cookie, and she eagerly reached out to take the box. "Thank you," the girl said as she opened the box to look inside. Apparently what was inside was more than satisfactory, as she gave a small smile and looked at Weiss once again. "So you're Yang's girlfriend?" Weiss didn't know how to answer that question, as while she wanted to say yes, she and Yang had yet to actually have that discussion themselves. A quick look at Yang revealed that she was eagerly awaiting what Weiss had to say. "I like your sister," was the answer Weiss finally settled on. She didn't want to lie to the girl nor make a decision without Yang. "We haven't really discussed what we are. But you do like her?" Weiss took a quick glance around the room to see that between her and the doorway was a table full of food. Deciding that they were safely out of sight, she reached out and took Yang's hand. "I like her quite a lot," Weiss said as she felt Yang's hand close on hers. "Well then," Ruby smiled sweetly as she pulled a cookie from the box. "If you like Yang, then I like you." It took a couple of seconds for it to sink in that she had just received Ruby's approval, and by the time it did, Yang had already released her hand and pulled her sister into a tickle hug that caused the girl to erupt into giggles. "Yang, let me go," Ruby laughed as she struggled to hold on to the cookie in her hand. "Aw, but you're so cute when you worry about me," the blonde replied and dropped the girl back onto her feet. "But you do remember what I said, right?" "About what?" "Ah, boo. Ruby," Yang let out a small sigh. "Me and Weiss are keeping things quiet, so you can't tell anyone." "Oh right, but Blake knows?" "Yes," Yang nodded. "Okay, I promise not to tell anyone." Ruby smiled and took a bite of the cookie. These are really good." "No talking with your mouth full," Yang scolded her almost immediately with a small poke to the younger girl's forehead. In response, Ruby stuck out a crumb-covered tongue and immediately ran off towards the living room before Yang could do anything to stop her. Once she had disappeared around the doorway, Weiss heard a small chuckling coming from the sink. Being so focused on making a good impression on Ruby, she had completely forgotten that Yang's father was still in the room. "Something funny?" Yang asked him. "No," he laughed to himself while washing a plate. "I just remember having to tell your mom that constantly, and she would react in the exact same way." The look on the man's face as he talked was full of joy, but there was a sadness to his eyes that made her feel a little bad for him. She couldn't even begin to imagine how painful it must be for him to watch Ruby grow up to look just like her mother. To look into those eyes and remember everything he had lost. Anyways, it's good to see you again, Weiss. The man quickly changed the subject. I'm glad you could make it. Me too, Weiss replied with a smile at Yang. Well, I'll give you two some privacy, he said as he dried his hands on a towel and made his way to the door. But if you're still here in a little bit, I'll be breaking out the family photos. Weiss felt Yang move slightly beside her and looked to find the blonde glaring at her father. You know, unless I find something else to keep me occupied, he followed up with a knowing smirk at his daughter. Weiss didn't want to speak as the two of them stared each other down, their eyes locked on each other's without blinking until finally Yang let out a loud sigh. They're in Ruby's old playhouse, she said in a defeated voice, shaking her head. Very shrewd. The smile on the man's face was so smug that Weiss could only assume he had just won some long-time war. Keep it family-friendly in here. His departing words caused Weiss to blush slightly, but the moment he disappeared from the door, she felt Yang slip her hand back into her own. I think that went pretty well, the girl said as she pulled Weiss in a little closer with a smile. You think she liked me? A wide smile stretched across the blonde's face as Weiss came to a stop so close to her that she swore she could feel the heat radiating from the girl. Weiss, you gave her cookies. Yang smiled down at her. She probably loves you already. I hope so. Aw, were you nervous? Yang teased. Shut up. Weiss scowled at the girl and leant into her. Before their lips could meet, however, Weiss heard the sound of heels against tile behind her. Not wanting to be seen, Weiss quickly pulled herself away from Yang and turned to see Pira watching them with an amused expression. You know, for what I'm assuming is supposed to be a secret relationship, you two couldn't be more obvious, the redhead said as she shook her head and took a small sandwich from the table. I don't. What do you mean? Weiss said defensively despite knowing that Pira had clearly just seen them. MHM, Pira hummed with a smile. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell anyone. Not knowing what to say, Weiss looked at Yang for help only to receive a shrug. Sensing that there was nothing she could do or say to convince Pira otherwise, Weiss just sighed. Thanks. Yeah, I guess there's no fooling the queen of obvious attraction. Yang winked at the girl. Weiss caught a small smile on the redhead face as she rolled her eyes. I will suggest you be a little more cautious though, Weiss, Pira said in a more serious tone. I don't know what reason you have for keeping this quiet, but the paparazzi have been more persistent than ever lately. While she was used to the occasional man following her whenever she left the house, there had definitely noticed another upsurge in their presence. It had taken Hazel 20 minutes to lose the ones following them on the way to Yang's house, and he had only succeeded in doing so by making a turn that would have definitely made a police officer stop him if they had seen it. I have noticed, Weiss groaned. They are probably trying to land a big Christmas bonus. I bet the story Weiss Schnee's super hot new girlfriend would land them a pretty hefty Christmas bonus. Yang chuckled. Weiss raised her eyebrow at Yang as she imagined her father's fury at finding out through a gossip magazine. Of all the ways for him to find out, that was definitely her least favorite. I would rather they had no title at all, Weiss huffed. Then I would suggest you both come and join us in the living room before Nora starts to suspect anything, Pira suggested and grabbed another sandwich. Yang knows just how fast it will spread if she finds out. Whatever joy Yang was feeling seemed to drain from her face at Pira's words. You're right, Yang said and gave the girl a nod before turning to Weiss. Are you ready? Though Weiss was still a little worried by how Pira's words had affected Yang, she gave the girl a nod and followed the girl into the other room. Asterisk. Weiss had never been much of a party person. Every party she had attended had either been a fundraiser where she had not been allowed to leave her father's side, or a boring dinner party where her father had used her as nothing more than a resource to impress the guests. This party, however, was very different. For a start, the classical music had been replaced with punk rock that Weiss was sure would cause the attendees of her usual parties to leave in disgust. There were also loud conversations, and the laughter, and the occasional cheer as someone won a game. And she was loving every minute of it. It had all started off pretty normal with Yang shoving John out his seat for Weiss to sit down, before joining Ruby at the television to play a game. She had no idea what it was about, but the only rule seemed to be that you had to knock your opponent's character off of the mini ledges. They had each taken it in turns to fight one another. Even she had played a couple of games before quickly figuring out that it was definitely not for her, but just as Ren finally seemed to be about to defeat John, who was surprisingly good at the game, Nora came barreling out of nowhere and tackled him to the ground in a hug. The commotion had lasted a few minutes, though it was apparent to everyone that the boy was clearly not trying very hard to escape. But once he had finally managed to free himself, they had both retired to the couch where Nora had taken up residence on the boy's lap, and neither had moved since. They were not the only couple who had caused some commotion either. Only a few minutes after, Sun had let out a very loud yelp of pain that had drawn the attention of everyone in the room. Weiss had to do her best to hold in a laugh as she turned around to see the very heavy-looking book Blake had been reading earlier crushing the poor boy's tail against the floor. Blake had quickly lifted it off with an apologetic look, but Weiss was still not sure if she had simply dropped the book or if something else had happened. After all that had passed, Weiss had somehow found herself in conversation with Blake's parents only to learn that she already knew of her father, Gyra. Gyra Belladonna was a lawyer who had become very well known in recent years due to his contributions to many of the laws that demanded the faunus be given rights equal to any human. She also knew that he had gone up against the STC quite a few times, but despite that he treated her with nothing but kindness. "So I recently heard some talk that an employee from the R&D department was fired rather abruptly," he said with a smile that showed off some teeth that were slightly more pointed than usual. "Do you have ears in all our departments?" Weiss answered back jokingly. "But yes, though I still have no idea how he managed to stay at the company as long as he did. Yes, we've met a few times, and I found him to be more unpleasant with each meeting." Gyra nodded in agreement. "You know him?" "In passing," Gyra sighed sadly. "Unfortunately, his son caused quite a bit of trouble for Blake in high school." "Well then, since he no doubt got it from his father, I now feel even better about firing the despicable man." Weiss smiled. "While I appreciate the gesture, be careful not to make a habit of firing people with a different mindset from your own." The man chuckled. "You will find that most people's views are simply products of their time, but they can be shown the errors in their judgment." "You think a man like Mr. Winchester could change?" "Him? No." Gyra shook his head, but the smile didn't leave. "But that doesn't mean there isn't others who can't." He gave her a knowing look as he sat back in his chair, and she immediately realized just why she liked the man. Unlike her father, who simply told her what to do, Gyra only advised. Just like Winter, he seemed to only want to show her a different path and let her choose whether to walk it or not. "I suppose you're right." Weiss smiled kindly at the man. "I will take it into consideration." "Good." The man nodded and looked towards the hallway as a man with black hair wearing a gray tailcoat and blank pants walked into the room. "I would cover your ears if I were you." "WH. Uncle Crew." Ruby's scream of joy was loud as the music, and Weiss watched in awe as the girl ran at the new arrival so fast that she was almost a blur. She was even more surprised when the girl launched herself at the man's chest from a distance that would probably make even a long jump athlete jealous. Apparently the man expected this though, as he caught her with ease. "Uncle?" Weiss said in confusion. In all their talk, Yang had talked about her father, her sister, and even a little about her mother, but she had never mentioned that she had an uncle. "Crow." Gyra nodded as he stood up from his chair. "And I should go say hello. It's been nice talking to you, Weiss." "You too, Mr. Belladonna." As the man made his way over to Crow, Weiss saw Yang making her way over to the chair that Gyra had just left, and it was only as she drew closer that Weiss saw the girl didn't look especially happy. "Hey, Weiss," she said while putting on a smile that was very clearly fake. "Enjoying yourself?" "More than you seem to be. What's wrong?" "It's nothing," Yang said dismissively. "So what were you and Gyra talking about?" "Work stuff," Weiss said shortly. "But it's clearly something. You were laughing and smiling before your uncle arrived." Yang gave her a long look that made Weiss worry she was pushing a little too hard, but eventually the girl just shook her head. "I just hate how much Ruby worships him is all." Yang sighed. "I don't really want to go into it, but let's just say she doesn't seem to remember everything the way it actually happened." "Oh," Weiss exclaimed. "Yeah." "Well," Weiss said carefully, "if you ever do then." "I know." Yang smiled. A genuine one this time that made Weiss' lips pull on their own. "So how is the tournament going?" Weiss asked to change the subject. "You tell me," Yang said and winked at her. "You've apparently been watching me all night." A blush quickly rose to her cheeks to accompany the smile. I would, but I think it's pretty clear I have no idea what is going on with that game. Yeah, you are pretty bad. Jan laughed. Guess you don't have time to play video games, huh? Not really, Weiss admitted. But I have never really had much interest in them anyway. What? Jan said in an insulted tone. How can you not like video games? This coming from the girl who won't open a book unless the teacher orders her to, said a voice from behind Weiss that she recognized as Blake's. Hey, books are too long, Jan replied. I think you are just a slow reader, Weiss laughed. She is. It took her 2 weeks to finish the first Harry Potter book. What? How? It was just so dull, Jan cried. Like, why learn to fire pew-pew lasers when you can just punch someone? Did you just? She did, Blake answered before Weiss could finish. Typical brute thinking. I'm not sure how I feel about you two teaming up on me. Jan scowled at them both before turning to Blake with a grin. How about instead you tell us what happened with Sun and the book? I dropped it. Blake shrugged, but her eyes gave away her lie. Something that Jan clearly saw too as her smile widened. Bullshit, she scoffed. If you dropped that book, you would be freaking out looking for scratches and folds. His tail caught it so there wouldn't be any, Blake replied as a small blush began to creep into her cheeks. Anyway, I should go get us some food. Pretty sure he already has what you two want in his wallet, Jan whispered to Blake as she walked past, causing the blush on her cheeks to deepen. Jan! Weiss scolded her, as even her own cheeks had heated up from the girl's words. I'm only joking. Jan laughed and winked behind her to where Weiss knew Sun would be sitting. Probably. You are terrible, do you know that? I do. Weiss couldn't help but smile at the stupid grin on Yang's face. Well, I would sit here and listen to more, Weiss said in a mock sarcastic tone. But I need to use the restroom. Upstairs on the right, Jan replied. That had better be the restroom. Weiss scowled at the girl as she stood up. Of course, Jan winked, making Weiss trust her even less. Weiss walked through the crowded room that she had slowly realized through the night was mainly couples apart from Ty, Ruby, and Oscar, thought she had noticed Oscar giving Ruby the occasional sideways glance, and made her way up the stairs. On the right was a single door that she slowly pushed open. Fortunately, Jan had not given her the wrong room, and she stepped inside. A couple of minutes later, Weiss dried her hands and was about to make her way out of the room when a pair of voices she didn't recognize floated up through the open window. Though she was generally against eavesdropping, she was just able to make out Yang's name and her intrigue was piqued, so she went over to the window and listened carefully. To know Ty, said a voice that Weiss had never heard before. I know that, but today is not the day to tell her, replied a voice that, despite its slightly angry tone, was definitely Ty's. Then when? I don't know. You know as well as I do how she'll react. Ty. No, Crow, this conversation is over for today. I'll talk to Jan when she's ready. When she's ready, or when you're ready? Ty didn't respond to that, but a couple of seconds later there was a loud bang of the door slamming closed. Weiss had no idea what she had just overheard, but she knew it was a conversation she definitely should not have heard, and now she had no idea what to do. Did she tell Yang? Part of her wanted to, but Ty had said something that had suggested Yang would react badly. After a couple of minutes, Weiss had made her decision. This wasn't anything to do with her, so with a sigh she left the room, determined not to say anything to Yang about what she had just overheard. However, she had just left the room and gotten to the top of the stairs when a door to her left opened, and she felt a hand wrap around her wrist and pull her inside. Before she could even take in her surroundings, a flash of gold rushed towards her, and she suddenly felt a pair of lips crash against her own as the smell of lavender filled her nose. It took her a couple of seconds to realize what was happening as heat flooded her system, but she quickly recognized the strands of blonde hair that fell in front of the closed eyes of her kisser. Finally understanding what had happened, Weiss closed her eyes and returned some of the pressure. As she felt the kiss deepen, Weiss wrapped an arm around the girl's waist until her nails scraped along the soft flesh of Yang's back. She allowed her hand to dig a little deeper, feeling all the strong muscles just under the girl's skin as she went. Wanting Yang closer, she raised her other hand and placed it on the side of the girl's jaw, her fingers burying themselves in the girl's hair, and pulled her in. Apparently sensing what Weiss wanted, Yang bent down and picked her up with ease to spin her around and place her on a nearby desk. Now at the same height, Weiss pulled the boxer in until her lips almost hurt from the pressure. After a couple more seconds, Weiss felt Yang's tongue ask for permission, and she gladly granted it. With the girl's tongue now wrestling with her own, a new heat made its way through Weiss. She knew she should stop, but she didn't want to. The feeling of Yang's lips on hers, the smell of lavender, the hand that was now running away down her back sending shivers through her spine. Each of them alone would be tempting enough, but together they were intoxicating. Wanting to feel more, she slid her hand around to the girl's stomach, her shirt riding up a little as Weiss' hand sought a destination. And Biao was the destination incredible. Her hand was greeted by the strong muscles of Yang's abs that hid just below the girl's soft skin. Unable to control herself, Weiss dug her fingers in a little deeper, squeezing gently as a small groan of pleasure escaped from Yang. Much to her displeasure, Weiss felt Yang pull back slightly. "I wanted to do ToxicExotic," Yang said in a single breath before crashing back in and taking Weiss' lips once again. This time, however, Yang's hands didn't remain on her back. Instead, they worked their way up until they were, and the collar of her jacket, and gave a small tug, not enough to pull it off, but just enough to let Weiss know she wanted it gone. Without hesitation, Weiss slowly pulled her shoulder down to let the fabric slide over it. Taking the hint, Yang pulled it the rest of the way, and Weiss quickly freed her wrists. Now free of her jacket, Weiss felt the slight pinch of cold air assault her arms, and quickly wrapped them around the back of Yang's neck to take in some of the heat that the blonde seemed to produce in excess. She felt one of Yang's hands skim against her back, easily pushing aside the thin t-shirt so that her hand could press against the skin, while the other seized the belt on Weiss' jeans and pulled their hips together. Suddenly the door to Yang's room opened, and Weiss felt Yang immediately rip herself away as they both turned towards the door to see black hair emerge from behind it. "Yang Ruby won! Blake, can't you knock?" The sound of Yang's yell made Weiss jump out of her skin as Blake's eyes widened, and seconds later, she had ducked back out of the room with her ears flat against her head. As Yang turned back to her, she could have sworn that the girl's eyes had turned a burning red, but a blink later, they were back to their normal soft lilac. Now that the moment was broken, Weiss took a moment to collect her thoughts and realized exactly just how much she had lost control. Not only had she practically felt up Yang, she had even allowed Yang to start stripping her clothes off. Fuck! Weiss looked up and saw that she wasn't the only one who seemed to be realizing what had just happened. Yang was looking at Weiss with what seemed to be regret, but her body was shaking a little. It didn't take long for her to figure out from the girl clenched fists that it was from anger. "Yang!" Weiss began, only for Yang to cut her off with a slight turn of her head. "Hey!" Weiss reached out and took the girl's fist with her own hands. "What's wrong?" She felt Yang try to pull her fist free, but tightened her grip so that the girl couldn't go anywhere. Silence filled the space between them for a few seconds, but finally Yang let out a ragged breath. "Me," Yang sighed. "I lost control." "So did." "No, Weiss," Yang interrupted. "It's not the same." "How?" "Because I wasn't thinking about what you wanted," Yang said in a slightly raised voice. "I was mad at Crow, and I just wanted to feel good, so I gave in to my urges." "Oh. I'm sorry." Yang apologized and finally looked her in the eye. "It's fine, Yang." Weiss shook her head. "And if you think I didn't want that too, then you were clearly not paying attention." "That's not the point," Yang sighed. "If Blake hadn't come in, I don't know how far I would have gone, and I don't want it to be like that. I don't want our first time to be me being selfish." "I know." Weiss knew she couldn't wait any longer to have the conversation. "But I think I should apologize too." "What for?" Yang asked, confusion creeping into her eyes. "You did nothing wrong." "I did," Weiss argued. "I think I may have given you the wrong impression." "About?" Yang, Weiss sighed and pulled the girl a little closer. "I liked what just happened, I really did, but I'm not ready for things to go any further." Yeah." Silence crept between them, but after a couple of moments Yang gave her a small smile. "That's fine," Yang smiled. "You're not disappointed?" "I mean, sex is great, but it's not like I need it." Yang shrugged. "If you're not ready, then we'll wait until you are." "But I don't know when that will be." Weiss admitted nervously. I don't care. Are you sure? Yes. Hearing the resolution in Yang's voice, she breathed a sigh of relief. Wanting to show Yang that she appreciated her understanding, Weiss gently pressed her lips against the blonde's. The kiss wasn't a long one, but she tried her best to convey how much she cared about the girl. There is one other thing I wanted to ask you, Yang said as their lips separated. And what is that? Weiss asked as she snaked her arms back around Yang's waist. Well, Yang paused and thought. What you said to RWBY earlier when she asked about us. Oh, that. Weiss smiled. She knew what Yang was going to ask, but decided to let the girl do it herself. Yeah, that. Yang nodded and placed her hands on either side of Weiss. We've been dating for a couple weeks now, and I have no intention of ending it, so I was just wondering what you would think if I said I was ready to, maybe, make things more official? Yang, are you asking me to be your girlfriend? Weiss asked with an amused smile. I guess so, Yang replied quietly. But only if it's what you want too. While it wasn't common, she had found that she quite liked it when Yang acted bashful. There was something about watching the muscular, blonde boxer become flustered over her that made her feel warm, as it was a clearest indication of just how much she cared. Weiss hummed teasingly and pulled Yang close again. I am unable to think of a single problem I would have with that. A wide grin stretched across Yang's face as Weiss finished, but just as she was leaning in, a gentle knock sounded from the door. Yang? Weiss, came Blake's voice from the other side. Yang let out a groan as dropped her head, but there was no anger this time. What do you want? The blonde called to her friend. RWBY's about to open her presents. All right, Yang replied with a sigh and turned to Weiss. I guess we should go down. Though she would have liked to stay alone with Yang in the room, she knew that Yang was right, so Weiss pulled back on her jacket and slid herself off the desk. With one final look at each other, Yang pulled open the door to reveal Blake still standing behind it. The silence between her and Yang was a little unnerving at first, but in seconds Yang had put her arm around the back of Blake's neck and pulled her into a one-armed hug. Sorry for shouting, she said in a soft voice. It's fine, the girl replied and pulled away quickly. I should have not. Too right you should have. Yang scowled half-heartedly before giving the fauness a small shrug. Oh well, let's go watch RWBY freak out over her stuff. Asterisk. As RWBY opened each her presents, Weiss began to feel she had made a mistake in her purchase, since so far there had been a very distinct commonality between everything she had opened, and that was that they were all clothes of some sort colored red or black. The first present she opened was a pair of thick, gothic-looking boots that Weiss doubted her father would even let near the house, and from where she was sitting, she saw 4 buckles running up the side of each one. The next 2 presents were hoodies from Nora, Ren, Pira and John. She actually liked the hoodies, despite their color, as one was red with a black rose woven through the chest, and the other was the same except the colors were reversed. Following them was a corset-style mini dress from Yang, its skirt flaring out a little and multiple straps hung from the top. Weiss liked it, but she definitely hoped RWBY always wore a top underneath it. More clothes followed from Blake's parents, but Blake's present was the first that wasn't. Instead it was a thin book. Weiss didn't see the title as RWBY quickly hid it from sight, but the wink that Blake gave the girl made her really not want to. After Blake's, Weiss saw Ty pull her own gift from the pile and hand it to RWBY. It had taken her a little while to find the right gift, as while Yang had talked about RWBY quite a lot, the only real concrete thing Weiss had discerned about the girl was that she liked cars. With that being the only thing she knew, Weiss had talked to one of the engineering students about good gift, and he had pointed her to a shop that sold models with fully constructible engines. She watched RWBY unwrap the present carefully and turn it around to look at it properly. It took a moment for the girl to react, but once she had figured out what it was, her face broke into a huge grin. Oh my the girl exclaimed and looked up. This is a 1962 Ferrari Berlinetta. The man in the store said it was a must-have for car lovers, Weiss replied timidly. Thank you so much, RWBY said, and gently placed it down on the floor like it was a delicate piece of glass. These kind of construction kits are super expensive. It's no problem, honestly, Weiss smiled. Happy that RWBY liked her gift, she breathed a little sigh of relief and sat back on her chair as the girl continued to open the rest of her presents. Just like most of the others, Crow had chosen clothes and bought the girl a bright red cloak that she immediately threw over herself. Oscar had chosen a nice silver pair of rose earrings, not the kind of gift you would buy someone you didn't like, and Sun had given her a small box of new tools. Noise quickly returned to the room once everything had been opened, as Ruby made her way around thanking everyone, and Weiss was surprised as the girl approached her and pulled her into a hug tight enough to squeeze the air from her. Not quite sure what to do, she simply gave the girl a small hug in return, and soon after the girl moved on. A couple of minutes later, Weiss excused herself to the kitchen as the room was once again getting quite rowdy, and was surprised to encounter Blake sitting alone in a chair eating what looked to be a tuna sandwich. "Hello," Weiss said, not wanting it to seem awkward. "Hi," the girl replied, and used her leg to push out a chair opposite her at the table. "I'm guessing you needed some peace too?" "A little." Weiss smiled and accepted the seat. "I don't blame you." Blake nodded as one of the cat ears on her head turned towards the doorway where Nora could be heard shouting something. "She's a good friend, but she can be a little much sometimes." "I can see that," Weiss responded cautiously, not wanting to insult one of Blake's friends. Fortunately, the raven-haired girl only gave her a small smile and took another bite of her sandwich. "Don't worry, you will get used to it," she said once she had swallowed her food. "Especially if you and Yang are official now." Weiss raised her eyebrows at Blake only to see her wiggle her fawness ears again, and it suddenly dawned on her that Blake had likely heard everything they said. "Sorry for walking in on you two, by the way," Blake apologized, her amber eyes locked on her own with an intensity that made Weiss nervous. "If it's any consolation, Yang has never yelled at me like that before." "Thanks, I guess." Weiss nodded. "You've walked in on her before?" "I don't make a habit of it, but unfortunately it has happened a little more than I would like." "Oh." The implications of what Blake had just said quickly hit her and made her heart sink. It wasn't that she expected Yang to have not been with anyone else, but the way Blake had said it made it sound like it was more common than she had thought. "Everything all right, Weiss?" Blake asked, her eyes still locked on hers. Weiss tried to say yes, but the intensity in Blake's eyes made it very clear that she would see through the lie. "I feel a little guilty is all." "Don't," the girl replied without hesitation. "Huh?" "Yang is one of those rare people who knows exactly what she wants and will go for it, no matter the cost." Blake sighed and placed her sandwich aside. "If she wants a relationship with you, then she isn't going to care about keeping it a secret or having to be celibate for a while." "I know," Weiss nodded. "But that doesn't change that it is still unfair to what she wants." "True," Blake replied without blinking. "But life is quite frequently unfair." "That's not helpful," she groaned. Like I said, Blake shrugged and picked up her sandwich. Yang doesn't care. She knew everything going in and made her choice. "I know," Weiss said again. "Look, Weiss, I know everything Yang has ever faced, and this is one of the least unfair things that has happened to her," Blake said with a softness to her voice as she stood up. "But if you are really feeling guilty, then talk to her about it. She will tell you the exact same thing." "You are right," Weiss said reluctantly. Though the guilt was not gone, she knew that Blake was correct that Yang didn't care. "I'm aware," Blake replied. "Well, I'm going back in." As Blake turned to walk back into the living room, Weiss realized what she had said about knowing everything about Yang and decided to ask the girl about what she had overheard in the bathroom. "Blake?" Weiss called the fawness, causing Blake to stop and turn to face her with a raised eyebrow. "You said you know everything about Yang's life, right?" "Yes," the girl said with squinted eyes. "But those are things for her to tell you." "I know," Weiss said quickly, not wanting Blake to that she was snooping. "I don't want you to tell me." "Then why do you ask?" "Well," Weiss paused to think about how to say it. "When I was in the bathroom, I overheard Tai and Yang's uncle arguing about something." "Sounds rather usual for them," Blake said offhandedly. "What does this have to do with Yang?" "They were talking about telling her something," Weiss clarified. "Something she apparently wouldn't like." Blake suddenly stiffened and her eyes narrowed. "Tai and Crow?" "Yes," Weiss confirmed. "Do I tell why?" "Weiss," Blake interrupted her in a voice that made her shiver. "Forget that conversation." "But—" "No," Blake interrupted again, the finality in her tone making it very clear that Weiss shouldn't argue. "Just drop it." Without another word, Blake turned and exited the room, leaving Weiss more confused than before she had asked. Could whatever Crow had told Ty really be that bad? She thought to herself. As she sat there trying to think of what it could be, she realized just how little Yang had actually said about her past. The blonde frequently spoke of her art in college, her family, and she even spoke of her mother, Summer on occasion, but she had never mentioned anything of what had followed. She had of course let small things slip. Yang's anger at her uncle was apparent, and on the way to the museum during their last date, there had been a moment just before arriving at Beacon where she had completely zoned out. Weiss had tried to ask what was wrong both times, but Yang had quickly ended the conversation without saying much. Weiss knew that whatever secrets Yang kept still troubled her. Both times she had witnessed it because the emotion had been written all over her face. The first time it was pain, the second anger. Weiss was worried what the next one she saw would be. What really scared her though was pushing too far. She wanted Yang to be able to confide in her, to know that she would listen, but she was worried that Yang would shut her out if she pushed too hard. There you are! Weiss looked up to see Tai standing in the doorway. It's 7:15. Yang said you have to be home by 8. Ah, yes. She gave a nod and stood up. Thank you. Though she wished she didn't have to, Weiss made her way into the living room to see Yang sat at a table talking excitedly to John and Ren, and she took a moment to stop and appreciate the smile on the boxer's face. She was still getting used to the butterflies that filled her stomach every time she saw the grin spread across Yang's face, and hated that she couldn't stick around to watch it for longer, but, with a sigh, she made her way over to the girl and tapped her shoulder. Oh hey, Yang said, as she turned the smile towards her, and succeeded in intensifying the butterflies. Why so sad? Though she rolled her eyes at the horrible pun, she felt a smile pull at her lips. It's time for me to go, Weiss replied, the smile on her face not conveying her sadness of the statement. Damn already? Yang asked, the smile immediately dropping from her face, and Weiss gave a confirmatory nod. Alright, I'll show you out. Over the next few minutes, Weiss quickly said goodbye to everyone at the party. While she simply exchanged the word with many of the guests, she was surprised when Ruby once again pulled her into a hug and thanked her for the present, but she quickly returned it. The other surprise was from Blake's father, who gave her his business card and told her to call him if she ever wanted some advice. All too soon, however, she found herself in the hallway saying goodbye to the person she wanted to leave the least. So, Yang said, as they moved closer to the front door in an attempt to stay out of sight. Did you have fun? Weiss looked up into the girl's eyes to see a small amount of hope in them. I actually did. She smiled as Yang's eyes lit up from her answer. Great! Yang smiled back and leant back to take a quick look into the front. Seemingly satisfied, Yang placed her hands on either side of Weiss' waist a step closer. Knowing that Yang was about to kiss her goodbye, she felt her body heat up a little, but she knew she had to clear something up first. Yang! Weiss stopped the girl as she began to lean in. Wait. What's wrong? Yang asked, her brow lowering in confusion. No one's looking. It's not that. Weiss shook her head, both to emphasize her point and to clear the fogginess that was being caused by the placement of Yang's hands. I know we talked about this a little, but I need to know that you are sure about us. Wait. Yang's initial scoff made Weiss cut her off. I am serious, Yang. Weiss interrupted. I need to make sure you understand that I don't know how long it will be until I can tell my father, and I won't be ready for that until we no longer have to hide. Yang was already shaking her head, but Weiss knew she was listening to her. I just want to make sure that this is really what you want. Yang gave her a hard look that lasted for a couple of seconds before finally speaking. Are you done? Yes. Good. Without another word, Yang quickly closed the gap between them and pulled her into a kiss. It wasn't at all like the frantic one they had shared upstairs. That one had been pure frantic lust that had pushed all sanity from her mind. This one, however, was full of care. The pressure on her lips, and how still Yang's hands were on her waist being more than enough to convey everything Yang needed to say. After a couple of seconds, she felt Yang pull away and took a shuddering breath. Now please, Yang sighed contently. Stop doubting it. Weiss breathed a sigh of relief as she gave Yang a small nod. While not all of the guilt was gone, the kiss had washed away most of her remaining concerns. Okay, Weiss smiled happily. Great, Yang smiled back. So I'm guessing it will be a while before we can hang out again? Unfortunately, Weiss replied with a frown. I had to move around some meetings and hand off a couple of things to Seal just to be here today. Damn, Young replied while reaching past Weiss to open the door. I guess I will have to make the most of your morning coffee runs. And what exactly do you mean by that? Weiss grinned as she heard Hazel pull up to the walkway and stepped outside. Wheel, Young playfully dragged out the word. I'm thinking a little flirting, maybe some hand grazing, totally accidental of course. Weiss laughed at Young as she watched Hazel get out of the car and open the door ready for her. And I will most definitely be pulling you into back room for some private conversations. I can just imagine how insightful those conversations will be, Weiss teased. Oh, I intend to make them very insightful, Young replied with a wink. Well then, Weiss chuckled and took a step backwards towards her car. I must go, but I look forward to seeing exactly how insightful you can be. Good to know. Young grinned while leaning against the door frame. Text me later? I will. Weiss smiled and walked the rest of the way to her car and got inside. Good night, Young. Night. As Hazel shut the door and made his way back to the driver's seat, Weiss waved to Young, who responded by blowing a kiss. But even the joy that rose in her from Yang's playfulness could not stop the sadness that filled her as Hazel drove her away from the house and towards a dinner that would no doubt ruin her mood for the rest of the night. Chapter 11. Those Few Moments. Weiss Schnee. Vibrations gently ran through Weiss' lips as her girlfriend let out a soft moan of happiness from their gentle kiss, the girl's hands on her waist slowly pushing her backwards until she felt a hard surface press against her lower back. With no more room behind her, the two of them stopped and Weiss felt the girl's arms position themselves on the counter either side of her to cut off any way she could move. Knowing why Young was doing it made Weiss smile to herself and decide to play along. Removing her own hand from the blonde's waist, she slowly ran it up one of the arms trapping her until she felt soft strands of loose hair brush against her fingers. Smiling to herself, Weiss trailed her finger along Yang's collarbone to elicit another soft groan from the girl before laying her hand against the center of the girl's chest and applying a little pressure. After a couple of seconds, Yang pulled her lips away and opened her eyes questioningly. Is this not a health code violation? Weiss teased with a smile. Normally, was the only word Yang replied with a small smile before moving back in. Weiss allowed the blonde's lips to linger on his own for a few seconds before once again pushing the girl away. Normally? Weiss chuckled with a raised eyebrow as Yang pulled back. What is different about this time? Well, you're pretty hard to resist, Yang answered with a small contented sigh. That is sweet, but I am not sure that is how it works, Yang. Weiss laughed at the girl's logic. Then how about that this is the longest I have seen you in 3 weeks? Yang pouted jokingly. I'm sure any health inspector would give me these few minutes. So you were saying that you miss me? I don't even have time to tell you how much, Yang replied, her voice tinged with disappointment. When will you actually get a day off? Weiss knew how Yang felt. Her placement in the research and development was only supposed to last a month, but 1 week ago, her father had surprised her by saying she would be staying there longer. Apparently the increased productivity and staff morale since she had fired Cornell, alongside the promising designs she had personally approved, had impressed her father enough that he considered her more valuable where she was. However, with college at the same time, Weiss had been unable to make much time to even come to Blake's store in person, let alone make plans with Young. I know, Weiss sighed sadly. Me and Arthur are still going over budgets for new projects, and I really do not want to pawn him off on Seal. You think that girl can't handle him? Young scoffed as a knock sounded from the door to the storefront. With a loud, frustrated groan, Young bowed her head and stuck her arm out of the nearby door for it to return a second later with a piece of paper. Seal can handle Arthur easily, Weiss said as Young busied herself with making the ordered food. I would just rather she did not have to. He can be infuriating, to say the least. And you can't fire him? As much as I would like to be done with him, no. Weiss smiled while she watched Young. Even in the girl's rush to finish the sandwich, she still took care in its preparation. For all his faults, he hasn't done anything to warrant it, and he actually runs the department well. Most of the time anyway. Still sounds like a dick, Young sighed. I'm guessing a kick in the nuts is a no-no too? Unfortunately, Weiss laughed at what she hoped was a joke. Anyway, why have you been working so much lately? Your fight is next week, right? Yang gave the door a small knock as she finished making the food, and Blake's head popped though to look at them both with sharp amber eyes. Don't worry, I am making sure she goes to practice every day, the raven-haired fauna said while she picked up the plate. Besides, she isn't working another shift until after the fight. Keep eavesdropping, and I will tape your earmuffs to your head, Yang interjected with a raised eyebrow. Again. How terrifying, Blake replied sarcastically and rolled her eyes as she left the room. Due to the frequency of being in the kitchen over the past few weeks, Weiss had slowly become accustomed to how Blake and Yang's relationship worked. At first, she had struggled to understand it, but she had quickly realized that it was just how they communicated. Yang would quite frequently make cat comments or puns, but it never felt as when her father used them. Though Blake did seem to hate the puns more, a sentiment Weiss herself had never thought she could sympathize with. The fondness was almost as bad as Yang when it came to shrewd comments, and even Weiss had to admit that the girls seemed to be winning in the apparent insult competition. Almost every other interaction they had, Blake would make a comment about the blonde boxer being more brawn than brain. But much to Yang's annoyance, every once in a while Blake would make a comment that just flew over the girl's head, and the fawness would walk away with a smug look on her face. Yang usually recognized the insult seconds after, but by then, the battle was already won. You taped earmuffs to her head? Weiss asked incredulously. Yang shrugged dismissively and pulled a stool from under a counter. Only once. Weiss let a smile take over her face for a few seconds as she took a sip from her coffee. So why are you working so much? Weiss repeated her question. While she certainly had no problem with seeing Yang during her sporadic visits over the last week and a half, the fact that Yang had been in the store almost every time meant that the blonde was working almost as much as she was. And please do not say it is just to see me, Weiss added. That's just a bonus, Yang grinned. But I'm actually close to something I've been working towards for a couple of years. And that would be? Nope, Yang replied and stuck out her tongue. That's pricey information. Knowing what Yang was getting at, Weiss scowled at the girl for a second before she pushed herself off the counter and stepped towards her girlfriend. With Yang sitting down, Weiss was slightly taller than the girl, so with her best attempt at a flirty smile, she reached out and grabbed the collar of Yang's jacket. Well, Weiss smiled cheekily. Fortunately for me, I am very rich. As she pulled Yang in for their lips to meet, Weiss felt a pair of strong arms wrap around her back and pull her closer. As usual, being wrapped up in Yang's arms made her heart race as the feeling of warmth flooded her system. The short moments that Weiss allowed herself to indulge had quickly become some of her favorite moments in the world, since she knew that Yang was feeling everything the same way she was. Because of that, she had found herself enabling Yang's teasing far more often than not. Not wanting to encourage the girl too much, however, Weiss pulled back and gave her a small grin. Is that enough? You promise you won't freak? Yang said nervously. Though she was a little worried by what she was agreeing to, Weiss gave a short nod. A motorbike. Please tell me you are joking? Weiss sighed at how unsurprised she was by the reveal. For some reason, now that she had said it, Weiss couldn't imagine Yang driving anything else, but that didn't mean she liked the idea of her girlfriend endangering herself like that. Nope. Yang smiled, albeit a little nervously. I already have my license, and Dad promised that when I had raised enough myself, then he would put up the rest. And exactly how long have you wanted to die? Weiss asked with a small scowl, but Yang only chuckled at her question. Since I was 12, Yang smiled. But like I said, I have my license, so I know what I'm doing. I still don't like it, Weiss said stubbornly. Really? Yang smirked with a raised eyebrow. So you don't think I'll look super hot riding one? Weiss rolled her eyes at the girl and half-heartedly tried to take a step back, only to be stopped by Yang's arms. She looked down into Yang's eyes and saw that, despite the grin that was painted across her face, there was nervousness in those beautiful balls of lilac. Maybe, Weiss finally replied, but I don't think you would look very good spread across the floor. Yang let out a small laugh, and Weiss responded by lightly hitting her chest. The blonde's ability to find an innuendo in almost everything was admirable, but she would never admit such a fact to Yang. You know what I mean, Weiss scowled. Don't worry so much. Yang grinned and pulled Weiss forward so that she was now stood between the girl's legs. I'm a great driver. Weiss continued to scowl at her as she moved her hand from the girl's chest up to her cheek and watched Yang's eyes flutter close for a second. You might be, but there are many who are not, Weiss sighed. Then I will be extra careful, Yang replied, her tone serious despite her smile. Promise? I promise. Yang smiled and bit her lip. I've got some pretty amazing things to stick around for after all. With one last sigh at Yang's reckless nature, Weiss lowered her head and pressed her lips softly against her girlfriend's. She knew Yang had heard her concerns, as the girl didn't even attempt to deepen the kiss. Instead, she simply allowed her lips to linger in place in an attempt to reassure her. Finally feeling a little more at ease, Weiss broke away and looked into Yang's eyes with a content smile. Good. Weiss would have loved to have stayed in Yang's warm embrace all day, but unfortunately time was not on her side, as her scroll began to vibrate in her pocket to indicate it was time for her to leave. Yang apparently felt the vibration too, as she let out a small groan. Please tell me it's not. I'm sorry. Weiss apologized and pulled her scroll out to turn off the alarm. It's fine, Yang replied, a slight sadness seeping into her voice. Just make sure to text me the minute you know you have a free day. I will be messaging you the second I know, Weiss countered as she straightened out her clothes. You better, Yang smiled. Have fun at work. You too. Weiss gave Yang a final peck on the cheek and exited through the door. She moved quickly as she knew from experience that if she lingered, she would likely spend far too long saying goodbye. A familiar post-breakfast silence greeted her as she walked into the storefront to see a majority of the tables empty. It wasn't surprising to Weiss that business often dropped during the day, as the cafe was surrounded mainly by office building with only a few other stores, but she knew that around lunch and afternoon the place became so busy that on the occasions she had arrived during those times, Weiss had decided against going into the back so as to not distract Yang. She is a good driver, you know, Blake said in a bored voice as Weiss walked out from behind the counter. I thought Yang told you not to eavesdrop? Weiss smiled at the girl. It's boring out here, the girl shrugged. Besides, she tells me pretty much everything anyway. At first, the fact that Blake constantly knew everything about her relationship with Yang had unsettled Weiss a little, but she had quickly come to understand that there was nothing Yang didn't tell the fauness, and she had no intention of trying to change that. She knew that despite whatever Yang said, their secrecy did add a certain amount of strain, and she wasn't going to tell Yang not to use her main confidant. True, Weiss admitted as Blake started to clean the coffee machine. Do you know when Yang's fight starts, by the way? You thinking of coming to watch? Weiss gave the fauness a small nod. Friday at 3. Thank you. Weiss smiled gratefully at her. But please don't tell her. I don't want to get her hopes up in case I can't make it. No problem, Blake said with an understanding nod. Grateful for the girl's understanding, Weiss gave Blake a quick smile before turning and leaving the cafe. Blake Belladonna. Yang often tried her best to sneak up on her, but she had rarely been successful. In this case, Blake had heard the light creaking of the kitchen door open and was therefore unsurprised when two arms snaked around her waist, the hands linking over her stomach. Hey Blakey, the girl cooed. Where's the duct tape? We're out, Blake said impatiently. She wasn't in the mood for Yang's teasing. You didn't tell her. Blake felt Yang's chin drop on her shoulder, and she could imagine the smile fading from the girl's face. She was clearly trying to think of what to say, as Blake could feel the slight movement of her jaw. I can't, she heard Yang whisper sadly. She's finally stopped worrying so much. All the more reason to tell her now, she reasoned. Silence followed her words for a minute, and she felt Yang's arms tighten a little around her. Blake knew how she was feeling, she always did, but that didn't change what needed to be done. I'm scared. The words would have been imperceptible to any human, but not to her. The tremble in her best friend's voice made her pause, but she had to make Yang. I know, she replied with a softer voice that was reserved only for Yang. You are getting close. I can see it in the way you look at her, and you don't want to lose her, but if you don't tell her yourself, then that will most likely be the outcome. But if neither of us... She's planning on going to the fight, Yang, Blake interrupted and felt Yang's body immediately stiffen. She felt a little bad for betraying Weiss so quickly, but she had no other choice. If she does, then she will see it. Once again, Silence filled the small amount of space between them as Yang thought. Blake understood her hesitation. Yang's past was not a pleasant one, and she knew the idea of it repeating was the girl's greatest fear, but Blake was trying her best to prevent that. She was almost certain that if Yang waited any longer then her fears might come true. You're right, Yang finally sighed, the fear evident in her voice. She's going to hate me, isn't she? I don't know about hate, Blake said honestly. She certainly won't be happy, but I think she likes you enough to be understanding, eventually. Reassuring, Yang groaned. I'm going in the back to think. Without saying anything else, Blake turned and watched as Yang walked back through the door into the kitchen, her shoulders slumped at the prospect of the coming days.
And that's all for today. Thanks for coming by and hanging out. I hope to see you next time.